the issues you care about, and breakfast with key decision makers. The Fresno Chamber of Commerce, Fresno First Bank, Walmart, and University Square Hotel proudly present Eggs and Issues with special guest, Assemblymember David Valadao.
We just finished up in Sacramento. We finished August 31st. The deadline was midnight for any simple majority type votes, regular votes. We went on just a couple hours beyond that because the Constitution allows us to go beyond the midnight deadline for constitutional amendments, for two-thirds majority votes, and for tax increases. And so there was a couple of those votes there at the end. My personal experience up there for the last 2 years, I can honestly say wasn't a bad experience. I mean, it's tough being a Republican in the minority. We lost a lot of our fights that we wanted. I had a couple bills signed by the governor. I had one last year that had to do with in-home health care services, and I had mine that was signed the other day that had to do with corn ethanol and funding for that from the 118 fund that was created a few years back. So I actually had the opportunity to have those two signed. My 118 money, the ethanol money that was cut off, was a fun vote, a great experience for me because not many times can a legislator or anybody say that when I testified I had the Sierra Club and the poultry industry sitting next to me testifying on my behalf. I mean, talk about a bipartisan support across the field. But it was an interesting fight. We had a really heated debate last year. It ended up being a 2-year bill, and this year we were able to get it through and it made it a little bit easier. My personal biggest disappointment was a bill that I worked on really hard this year, was 2369. I have a lot of prisons in my district, a lot of relatives and friends that work in the prison system, and they've told me about inmates and some of the medications we spend on them. So I introduced a bill that required generics for inmates because we spend a lot of money in brand name medication. And at first it sounded like a great idea, and so I had a lot of the pharmaceutical companies come in. And they started talking to me and they said, all right, Dave, this sounds great. I know you're trying to save the state money, but allow us to compete. If you don't allow us to compete, the generics are going to take advantage of the situation. And my staff looked at me and said, you're going to get this bill through no matter what you do, but do you want to go through the trouble of amending it and risking losing some support? I said, well, my personal experience on the dairy, I purchased pharmaceuticals for my cows, and there was a lot of times that the pharmaceutical companies come in with a discount, and so it allows them to be competitive with the generics. I said, well, my personal life, real life, yes, it does make a difference. I do want that competition. So I started meeting with California Department of Corrections, Government Affairs, or the Department of Government Services, the ones that do the purchasing. And they already had a mechanism in place to allow for the bidding process. So that's the path I went. I took the amendments, allowed for the competition, and it was, we were looking at numbers where it would save the state about $20 million. Well, while all this was going on, the governor took my language, put in a budget trailer bill. And then he called my office and said, we took your language, your bill's no longer necessary. I said, all right, that's interesting. What part? Well, they took my original portion of my language. I said, well, that's not good. Mine went through the committee process. We had an open forum. Our committees are always open to the public. People speak out. All the industry players, all the players are at the table making decisions and trying to craft a workable piece of legislation that's good for everybody that actually saves the state money. And it got pretty heated. I made it to the Senate floor, or I made it to the Senate committee, took my amendments that I liked, got out of that committee, went to the next committee, and it blew through there on consent calendar on the Senate floor, and they pulled it back to rules. And so I started fighting with leadership on the Senate side, and it got pretty ugly with some of the staff, a little bit of yelling, and I finally I thanked her for her time and said, I understand what you're doing. You've got a room full of people here. Next year you'll have 80 members sitting on this floor and 40 on the other side. And they're going to have to do something. So I guess they'll introduce this bill and fix what you're not willing to fix today. And she gave me a funny look, and we ended it at that. And that was a bill I think would have been a good piece of legislation instead of taking early language that doesn't go through the process, because we all know the budget doesn't go through an open process. It's behind closed doors. No one really gets to see anything till the last minute. And so no players, no people that understand the effects of those bills actually have any input. And she didn't seem to agree with that, but it is what it is. That was my personal biggest disappointment, but it was a good experience. It allowed me to go into it. I had some wins, I had some losses, and I think that's what makes for a successful life, when you experience those type of experiences. As far as the business community, there's been a lot of tough legislation go through. We had some bills that made it to the governor's desk that I thought was good for small business that he decided to veto. We had some bills that he decided to sign that I didn't think were so hot. And it'll be interesting to see how it affects our community. We've got RPS, things like that are going to affect our energy costs, that are going to affect a lot of you here in this room. We had some legislation that was supposed to help with ADA compliance and the way that drive-by attorneys are hitting our restaurants and some of our industries, and we didn't get that signed. We had some education stuff that we were hoping to see make it to the floor. And I don't know if anybody watched the CNN story that happened, but that was a pretty nasty story where a bill made it out of the Senate and died in the Assembly because of a lack of votes, and where a labor group put a lot of pressure. And it was a good bill to allow school board members and principals to lay off teachers when they have one of three very specific things: when they've been charged with a violent, sexual, or drug-related charge. And that bill was killed, and that was a bill that should have made it to the floor to help protect our students, and that's not what happened. So those are the, I guess, the more depressing side of Sacramento, if that helps anything. I got all the long faces here. We've got to cheer up. I mean, there was some good things that happened, and we worked hard. We had some pension reform. That was a good thing. And it was not everything that the governor wanted. When the governor introduced his plan last year, he had a 12-point plan. The Republicans followed suit, took his language word for word, put it in legislative form, handed it to him, said, "Governor, here's your language, your bill. You've got us on board. Let's move." And the bill was never heard in committee, but we did get about, I think, 7 of those points. And it was one of those where Republicans kind of got beat up a little bit because we voted for it. Well, we proposed an idea. We wanted to go all the way through, but we took what we could. We took an opportunity, just like my ethanol bill. It didn't get rid of the problem nationally, but I took that small step forward rather than sit on the sidelines complaining about what we didn't do. We did do something, did make a difference, and I'm proud of the fact that we did make a difference. Trying to think of what else. I forgot my notes in my car. Traffic slowed me down a bit. Aside from that, I think I'm just going to open up for questions, make it a little bit easier, and let everybody, we'll talk about what you guys want to talk about. So, anybody? Yes, sir.
Tell us about your vision for going back east.
My vision for going back east. When I was, as a dairyman, I spent a lot of time in D.C. advocating for dairy issues, agriculture issues. Washington, D.C. plays a big part in our industry, in our valley, when we have a lot of issues with water, Endangered Species Act, a lot of issues with energy, and a lot of issues with trade policy. And those are all things that you can do more at the federal level. I ran for state office. You want to make a difference, but it's tough to make a difference in Sacramento. Not many members actually get bills signed. I was lucky, but when you have an opportunity to help your constituents, what do? Do you stay up there and fight, or do you go to D.C. and try to offset some of the things that are done in Sacramento? And that's what my goal is. I think things like RPS that was passed are going to be very hard on our industries here. RPS, Renewable Portfolio Standard, it's going to increase our energy costs. Those are issues that affect us. The Endangered Species Act with the Delta and water, and how that affects not just farming but communities. We've got a lot of communities in my district specifically with bad water. And the Delta plays a big part in that. If we've got water coming into the valley, it's not just for farmers, it's for communities. And we have to work on some of the ways to get some funding down here to make sure that we put in those water treatment facilities. We hear so many different stories about these communities, and I've gone and looked through a lot of the communities, looked through the bids that come in for these treatment facilities, and they're a little community of 1,500 people. You're looking at $7 to $16 million to build a water treatment facility, and those communities can't pay for that. And then you look at communities like Lanier that actually have a water treatment facility there on their property, taxpayer funded, and you see the news articles come out with locals saying $40 to $60 I'm spending on bottled water for that community, for those people. And when I look at the numbers of what it costs to operate, if they were to operate it right, they'd be around $40. But they've got people living there, and they're right next door to some of the houses irrigating 3 and 4 acres with treated water. You can't afford to treat water for that type of cost and then irrigate 3 and 4 acres. It makes no sense. And so it's situations like that where it really hurts when you're trying to help a community. But at the federal level, you're given more room because you're obviously in the majority, and even when you're in the minority, everybody knows there's an opportunity to come back. So I think people are treated with a little more respect than Sacramento. And when you're trying to work on those type of issues, I think there's a lot more room. I mean, just yesterday, Jim Costa in the minority had some grants for some airports in the community. It's a great thing, and he's in the minority, and it's possible. So, but my vision there is mostly just trying to offset some of the damage Sacramento does. Yes, sir.
Water is a big issue, obviously.
Yes, sir.
What is the scuttlebutt in Sacramento about the Hetch-Hetchy situation and the vote in San Francisco?
Well, and the Hetch-Hetchy thing is, we didn't deal much with the Sacramento, that in Sacramento. They're going to vote, that's on the ballot, and as someone that appreciates the value of a dam, I don't understand why they would ever tear it down. I'm afraid of the number of voters they have in that community if they do tear it down and they figure out real fast that they need that water, where it's going to come from and how it's going to affect us. So I know some members look at it as an opportunity to take a jab at them, but
have you seen any polling on it?
I have not seen any polling. That's a San Francisco issue. I've been focused on my issues. So, but I know there's a lot of Republicans that love that issue. They love pushing it forward. I'll tear down Hetch-Hetchy. You want to tear down our dams? Let's tear down yours. At the end of the day, that's not good for anybody. So, yes, sir.
Could you tell us how the drought in the Midwest and how it's affecting corn, how it's affecting the dairy industry, and what's the ripple effect of that?
Well, the droughts affected the crop of corn, and that's run up the cost. Right now, or just yesterday, I read a report that said that there's some investment-type bankers that are projecting corn at over $9 for a 3-month, and for the next 6 months, 8 1/4. I didn't check this morning, but yesterday we were $7.70, $7.80 a bushel. Corn used to be $2.50 a bushel, and that's affecting you. I mean, I know that everybody wants to say it affects the corn, the dairymen and the beef guys and the chicken guys, but you guys got eggs on your plate. It affects you. Most everything you eat has some kind of corn in it, so it's got a direct impact on you. One thing we've been putting a lot of pressure on the president for is to pull back on the EPA mandate, the 10% on the ethanol mandate. That would be a huge benefit for us. I talked to my trader yesterday, and his comment to me was, well, it's going to affect the price of fuel, and I disagree. If we pull the mandate and tell the blenders that they don't have to put 10% in, that they put in what they want, I think the market will decide what they're going to put in their blends, and then they'll make the decision from there. But when you take that mandate away that requires that 10% of our fuel comes basically off our dinner table, that's got a huge impact on us. And I'm supposed to talk a little bit about the dairy issue. The dairy issue that I'm going up today for is a really complicated issue that most people don't understand. I've read a lot of articles on it, but I guess to explain it in a short way, the Chicago Mercantile Exchange, 845 cheese trades, 855 powder trades, and 905 butter trades. That's the cash market. That's what you as a consumer pays for that product. And that has, the secretary, no government agency has any control over that. Where the government gets involved is when they take that cash price and they use a formula and they break it down. They say, all right, processors, you guys get this cut. Dairymen, you get this cut. Transportation costs this much. And they make those decisions based on studies. And California has its own pricing system different from the other 11 in the country. And ours has been different. The weigh factor of it is the biggest part that's really taken a hard hit on us. The rest of the country's figured out a way how to adapt with the new whey market, because I know everybody's seen the whey protein shakes and the whey protein, that the WPC you see in those ingredients. That's where the big headache hit. When whey first came out, the price was 13 cents per pound, and that was 5-6 years ago when I started following it, 7 years ago. The make allowance that the government decided that it cost to make whey was 17 cents. So the government told us, dairymen, it costs 17 cents to make this product, only worth 13 cents. The processors were getting 17 cents, they were taking it out of my check. That's how it works. The processor always gets their check, and that's because our secretary makes that decision. So when she fired up this task force the other day, it was an insult, because I called her last December and I told the secretary, I said, Secretary, what you've done, you've chopped our legs off. The dairy is a very cyclical industry. We take our ups and we take our downs. We save in the good times and we spend in the bad. And now you've taken our good times away from us when you compare to the rest of the country. And I called her again in February. I called the meeting in my office. I brought her, Connie Conway, and I invited chair of our ag committee in the assembly. She decided not to show. She's going to staff her instead. But the secretary came in, undersecretary, and 3 economists, and we went over the formulas. And if you look at the CDFA code, California Department of Food Code, it actually says that she has to keep the pay price of our California dairymen in a reasonable rate compared to the neighboring states. And not that I, as a dairyman, like that. I'm a Republican. I'm a free market kind of guy. But that's the system we live in today, and it is what it is. But when the secretary, one person, actually has the power to make a change and change it today, and she's had that opportunity 3 or 4 times, and she hasn't done anything with it, it bothers me. So I had the meeting in my office. We again explained to her, you've cut off our legs. When the next downturn hits, when the drought hit, and it really affected the price of feed, it just compounded the issue, and now we've got, I think I read 48 bankruptcies here in the state of California. There was 1,700 dairymen, and now we're pushing 1,600. So a few months ago, Scott Walker sends out a little press release, governor of Wisconsin. He's got a goal. He wants to produce 30 billion pounds of milk by 2020. So I took the article, and his way of doing it, he's not subsidizing the industry, he's not doing anything goofy, he's just going to get more involved, hire some consultants, and work with dairymen so they become better businessmen. Sounds like a no-brainer. So I sent that story to the governor, to our secretary, and I said, look, secretary, you've cut our legs off, and now you've got this other state actually trying to increase production. And again, our price is set in Chicago Merc. Supply and demand does affect that price. It has a direct impact on what you, the consumer, pays for it. But those other states have done really well. We've averaged, compared to the rest of the country, about $2 a hundredweight less than everybody else for the last 2 years in a row. And $2 a hundredweight doesn't sound like a lot. A hundredweight is about 11 pounds of milk. But $2 a hundredweight when you're getting paid $14 is a big chunk. And when you're trying to service debt and trying to cope with corn prices, I remember buying corn at $95 a ton delivered to my place. And I'm not that old. And it hit $3.60 in the last month. $3.60. And our price, when I was around the dairy more, I can make money 10, 11 bucks. We were really efficient. I'm a numbers guy. I sat in my office and I penny pinched everything I could. We did really well. We were always very successful. And now to see $14 and you see price of feed tripling, you see a truckload of hay driving by. I remember paying $2,000, $3,000 a truckload of hay. Now you're seeing $8,000, $9,000. We've gotten very efficient. California dairymen could compete with anybody in the world, but when your secretary does not stand up for you and make sure that you get a fair level price like everybody else around them, so they can't save money and service debt like they should, like every other state does when times are good, so they can survive the downturns, that's what you get. And so that's why I'm going to Sacramento today. I really didn't want to have to take this issue up this close to an election because it looks, in my opinion, I'm a dairyman. It doesn't look good. But it's something that we have to do. It's something that we have to play a part. It is the largest agriculture industry in the state of California. It's close to $5 billion to the farm gate, $63 billion to the economy. It employs a lot of people. CDI and Visalia employs a lot of people. Land O'Lakes and Tulare employs a lot of people. Leprino and Lemoore employs a lot of people. And you've got Marquez Brothers. You've got all these different plants that employ a lot of great jobs. You've got these stainless steel welders that go out to my dairy and charge me $60 and $70 an hour. Those are great jobs, and those are small business guys that went out and bought their own welder and did something for themselves. I've got trucking guys. How many of you noticed those trucks running up and down the freeway hauling commodities with their own goofy name written in really cheap, like you see they bought them at, that's a small business guy. That's someone that went out of his way, borrowed everything he could to buy a truck, and he went to Orchard and bought these little mailbox type things and put on, but how American is that? I mean, that's the greatest thing in the world. Those guys are doing something for themselves. They want to make a difference. When I was down in Kern County walking precincts, knocking on doors, I don't know how many of those driveways I saw those guys' trucks sitting there. They use someone else's trailer, they haul commodities, and now we've got cap and trade killing them. It's not a good time, and it's things that we need to start standing up for, and cap and trade is another issue that's really got me scared. I think that's going to affect a lot of us here in California. What is it, carbon fuel standards, I forget the code for it now, but I saw some studies that say it's going to increase diesel prices by $1, $1.50. And those are all things that have a direct impact on our guys. Where we should be focusing a lot of our time is making sure that these people are competitive outside of California. We want California businesses to be in a position where they can compete with anybody else in the world. Where we are here in the Central Valley, we are in an awesome location to do anything. I mean, we've got rail to the east. We've got our ports, which obviously we have to invest in because the They're working on the Panama Canal so they can handle bigger boats, and in the Gulf of Mexico they're working on their ports. But California has to invest in our ports so we're in a position to export and trade with the world. We've got access to two huge communities, LA and San Francisco. That's a huge consumer base. Those are all things that California should be focusing on so we can put people back to work, and in a way that we're not relying on government like dairymen today, when you have government making decisions when you're successful and when you're not. And it's been an eye-opening experience for me in the legislature, but it's also been a great experience because I've had a voice. I sat on committees. I was able to impact some bills. I got a couple signed, but I also had a big part in a lot of bills where I played just by talking to members. Hey, if you would change this, it'd be great. I'd support it. And we do those things. There's a lot of good people in the legislature, both sides of the aisle. I had friends on the Democrat side and the Republican side that obviously get a lot of press because they like to say crazy things. And it works for them. It works for their district. That's fine. But there's a lot of good members right there in the middle that are willing to talk and have a conversation and work. And we all have our personal beliefs. We have all have our things that we have to do for our districts, and we vote our communities because that's what we were elected to do. So I know I went on a little long on one question, but thank you. Yes, sir.
If the governor's tax initiative does not pass, do the triggers go in effect as designed, or is the budget completely reopened?
I don't know. There's so much at play. November 6th, the day after Election Day, if the governor picks up seats in the Senate, if he gets his 2/3, I think they pass taxes. If they lose seats, and they might try to call a special session just before swearing in, early December, and try to get the votes there by a strong arm and a couple termed out members. I don't know. That's a tough one to answer because November 6th is such a huge day for that. I hear that polling's not so great around the Central Valley, but statewide there's a chance it will pass. I'm not a personal fan. I was given a story a little bit ago about prisons and the prisons I've toured in the district and some of the costs that we go there, that we see there. And I know we've got a lot of room to save money around this state in different issues, and I really wish they wouldn't put, I mean, they literally put a gun to our kids' heads with these trigger cuts. So it bothers me quite a bit. Yes, ma'am.
So in regards to the election, so do you think that the Senate is going to pick up that 2/3 majority?
The professionals are saying there's what, 2 or 3 seats. I think Todd Zinkin down in Moore Park to replace. He's in a tough race, but they feel pretty good about it. Jeff Miller down in Riverside. He was an underdog, but he actually has registration where he's on top now. And I don't think they get it. In the Assembly, I'm really confident they don't. I almost think we'll pick up a seat. But on the Senate, it's going to be tough. There's 2 or 3 seats there that are going to be tough. There's Mike Stoker in Santa Barbara. He's in a very tough race. I think he's number 3 on the list. But Jeff Miller looks really good. Todd Zinkin, I think, looks really good. And George Pleshanow. Marty Block has a tough vote. They're really beating him up on that education deal. And so that might play a part in that. When you have someone running for office and they beat you up for allowing pedophiles to stay in your classroom educating your kids, it doesn't really help with voters. Yes?
I work at Yale College, and we've seen a lot of cuts to the Cal Grant program. And because of that, a lot of our students are having to drop out of school because they either have to take out huge amounts of loans or pay out of pocket. So I was just wondering what your vision is for higher education.
There's, who's the one that said it? There's no better social program than a judge. It was Reagan that said that. Than a job. I'm sorry, not a judge. People need jobs. People have to have jobs. We have to get the economy going, private sector jobs, and so we can get these programs funded. We can get people back to work. If you can't get a loan, your parents having a job, being able to help you go to school, live it. I mean, that's our most important priority. If we get people back to work, it'll start putting all these things back in place. It's sad, but right now there's not enough money. The budget's actually bigger this year than it was last year. Last year we were around $86 billion. We're at $91 billion. So the governor's budget, the state's budget's actually grown. So the money's there for certain programs, but again, the only way to solve our problem is to get people back to work. What was another 380,000 people in the state of California on unemployment now? There's no way paying people at home not able to work and then having to pay for their kids' education. That just doesn't work. And then to try to keep up with all the other things the government has to do. So a vision for me is still, you have to focus on jobs. No matter what you do, people have to work. I hope that helps. Yes, ma'am.
You were saying something about in-home care. You just kind of touched on
Well, the bill that I had signed by the governor was 876. And I had a constituent in my district that if you're a caretaker, and this sometimes happens within the family, your grandson or someone you don't know, the state's paying for that person to take care of you, but that person also has the power of attorney. They can sign documents for you. And so my bill basically said that if this person has a criminal record and they've had issues with fraud and those type of things, that we have to get a third party involved. You can't have someone that's got a criminal record caring for our elderly or our sick and having power of attorney to sign documents for them. That's just a dangerous situation. So that was the bill that I got signed. It put the third party in there, a social worker, someone there to prevent that type of, I mean, they're literally stealing, robbing from people, taking advantage of our elderly. So that's what my bill was.
I personally work for an in-home non-medical care company, and one thing that we're having trouble with is obviously Medi-Cal, Medicaid doesn't cover us because they don't feel it's necessary that someone needs help bathing or getting to the restroom or meal preparations. Do you see any sort of changes? Because I know the challenge of the first 30 days trying to stay out of the hospital, and I do think that hospitals are seeing that it's necessary for companies like us to come in and help them stay home. But do you see any changes with that?
Well, this year we had a hearing up in Sacramento. There was a study done, I can't remember who it was done by, but they said about 60% of the money paid out in in-home health care services is fraud. People taking advantage of the system. So if 60% of the money is being spent on waste, that's our biggest problem. The people that need it the most. I remember during our last budget fight, I had a lot of people in my office that really needed the help. And it's sad because the people come in and you, as a taxpayer, as a constituent of the state, but also as a legislator, you want to make a difference and you want to help those people that need the help the most. But when you hear numbers like 60%, I told the group that was in my office, we're happy to help those that need us, and I would bet that 95% of the voters in the state of California would agree with me on that. That's our responsibility as humans on the face of the earth, is to care for people that need us most. But when you hear that 60%, that's just a depressing number. And to think that we're risking paying for those that need it to write checks to people who are just taking advantage of the system. And so that was my ask of them. Help us fix the problem. Help me find the holes where we can fix this to make sure that your funding is protected for those that need it. And I would guess that most people in my district would agree with that.
Do you feel that those people that are frauding are seniors? It's because they're forced to find private people to help them because they're unable to afford professional companies like myself to come in and, you know, we screen our caregivers and we fully train them before they even walk through that door. And unfortunately, because they are unable to afford our services because Medi-Cal, Medicare does not cover us, that they're forced to find Hello Joe, you know, Smith going and coming in and helping them out.
It probably has a little bit to do with that, but I also heard quite a few stories of relatives and grandson taking advantage of grandma, and that was the one that was the hardest to see. When the lady that came in and talked to me personally, she told me stories that it wasn't even someone that wasn't outside the family. It was their own grandkids or their own kids. And we all heard the story the other day of a lady that parked at Walmart, left a 101-year-old man in the car in a 100-degree day. And she was in there for an hour, and she was eating at McDonald's when they found her. And this guy sitting in his car. And that's probably someone that's being paid for by the state. And how do you get involved in that? I mean, how do you legislate from Sacramento to fix every single little issue? And I think that's why we advocate so much for local control, and you allow people at the local level who have more hands-on and more experience working with the individual people to make those type of decisions. Got to be another question. It was easy. Well, there's no more hands, so I guess we'll close. You got a question?
No.
Oh. Yes, sir.
Got a solution to high-speed rail?
No, high-speed rail, the vote passed. They've got the ability to sell the bonds and move forward with it. Now, as an elected, my job is to hold them accountable, make sure that they do it properly. I know there's still some lawsuits and some things going on, but it's going to be a tough road to shut it down now. Now it's just as elected, hold them responsible, make sure they do it as efficiently as possible, and spend that money in a way that helps our communities and helps our state. But yeah, obviously I wasn't a big fan of the project to begin with, but what do you do? It's another one of the votes that I lost. Thank you very much. I appreciate you guys coming out for me. Thank you.